all the human attributes of the Lord in the garden. If you analyze the story and read it as it is, as we have been, this is the fifth element. But you will see the human attributes are clear. The story is not lying. It's just the way we're being told the story is the myth. The story is very clear. Now, you do have to analyze other versions of the Bible that predates, like the Geneva or the King James to the New King James, and you can see the alterations, and you can even figure out why the alterations were made. And then once you see why the alterations were made and what the alterations are, you then now ask yourself, what's the spirit behind this? The spirit of deception? You know what I mean? The confusion? Purposeful confusion? Deliberate confusion? With the intent to cause and perpetuate disorder in order to maintain control over the land, the minds, the resources, the labor force of the masses. And you allow them to spend their lifetime to earn enough to feed and live, with the hope to one day be able to live and retire a stable and peaceful life. But the reality that they're chasing never transpire for most. Or perhaps most we know. Back to the subject to conclude. This is the final segment. Not only did they hide themselves amongst the trees, the Lord had to call to Adam and ask where they were. And they found out that they hid themselves amongst the trees from the presence of his Lord. And they, when they became self-aware, became afraid of their nudity, their nakedness, because ultimately we have to question ourselves, at that age, should they have been naked in the first place? And why was them coming into this knowledge offensive to their Lord? When will it be the right time for them to understand that there is a difference between the male and the female, and that the genitalia had something to do with procreativity? Specifically when God specified in Genesis 1:28 to be fruitful and multiply. Right? But the Lord is holding these people back, keeping them in a ignorant state. We call them innocent because it's not their fault. But with Noah, after the restart, the great reset, with Noah, he was drunk in his garden off his own supply, off his own crop. In his case, his wife was not around to cover him. So his son stumbles in on him, and his ignorance was his nakedness. And he's seen them in the state. Now his son, he leaves, he goes, he tells his brothers. They walk in backwards, cover their father. You see, the covering. It's about the covering. Now, as a result of seeing without being covered, their father's ignorance. The first one who stumbled, Ham, his lineage, his offspring were cursed by his father's ignorance. Now the other two were able to benefit from the knowledge that the brother came in and was able to give them forewarning. They benefited off the knowledge of their brother who came before them. But he bared the cross because he didn't have someone who forewarned him. Now, in the way they tell the narrative, he's the villain. Ham's the villain. He did this, he did this, he did this. No, that's not what the words say. People add things to the word to try to justify the narrative that they've been told, instead of using the words that are there to tell you and show you what is actually happening in the story and how it reflects to reality or relates to reality. But he said, who told you that you were naked? In 3:11. Who told you? He confesses here. This is the first confession. That this is something that someone told him. The fruits of knowledge is something that is told to you. Taught. Thought. Truth. Right after that, he assumed, have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded that you should not eat? Then the man said, the woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate. And the Lord God said to the woman, what is this you have done? And the woman said, the serpent deceived me, and I ate. Now, again, the word deceived there is a character that was given to the serpent, but the serpent did not, in fact, deceive. We don't find that out until later in Genesis 3:22, but you and I, we've already read that. The Lord confessed, indeed, the man has become like one of us. Capital U.S., by the way. To know good and evil. And now lest he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life. So there was no deception there. The Lord confirms this to be true. Everything that the serpent said is true. He said your eyes will be open. And verse 7 says, then the eyes of both of them were open. Adam lived 930 years. It says that so all the days of Adam that Adam lived were 930 years and he died. There was only Noah, who lived 950 years, and Methuselah, who lived 969 years. They're the only two that lived longer. Adam lived a long life. In the day, is it the actual Genesis 2:17, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. In that day he did not die. The only thing that you can say that happened in that day is twist his innocence lost into a death. But he lived on. But what happened is that in 3.14 and 1.5, which is Greek symbol for pi, mathematically, which is the measure of circumference, the centerpiece of this Bible, is 3.14, 1.5, right? So it says, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle. So now what they're doing is reducing them from the status of gods, of deities, to livestock. And more than every beast of the field. Again, the beasts of the field as opposed to the beasts of the earth, which are free and wild and abundant. On your belly you shall go. So they're going to be transported on their bellies like livestock again. Just like the ancestors who were taken from Africa were shipped over on ships on their bellies so that when they vomit, they do not choke on their vomit. Across the Atlantic Ocean, the Middle Passage, into the Caribbean and the Americas, and South America and Brazil and Bahia. That is the way that the ancestors, that is actually what transpired. There is no fictitious way of thinking about it. This is evident, this is reality, and also should include that this was a triangular slave trade, so that natives who were from here were taken across the Atlantic as captives into Europe as well. Prime example is the woman who was born by the name as Amunet, but was given the name Pocahontas, who was the daughter of a chief of the Powhatans, who were the first people that Christopher Newport and his men, military-age men, who entered the lands what we now call the Virginias, because they came in on a ship, the Virgin ship, representing London, the elites of London. My point of all this is to relate the teachings to what is actually transpired and what has transpired. The reality of our world, the truth about our existence here on this planet. We are a domesticated African, mixed in with indigenous American, mixed in with the European. We speak English. We are Englishmen. We have been cut off from our traditions, our knowledge of ourselves, the knowledge of our ancient history. We're living in the reality of 2023, 2024. But how long have we been descending on this planet Earth? Surely it hasn't been 2,000 years. It's been longer than that. The narration of this curse in Genesis 3:14 and 15, again, which is pi, is important to understand that it's part of what we see happening. It's very, very important to understand that